Hello, everyone, and welcome back to From Paranormal to Normal. I'm Kate Thorvaldsen, and I'm your host, and Tom Schaefer, he is my co-host and producer. Tonight, we will be talking about disclosure witnesses, and today we have Dan Willis with us again. Hi, Dan.
Hey, Kate. Got a little bit better lighting this time.
Welcome back. Last time we had a lot of technical problems, so hopefully this time will be better. So, Dan, how did you get involved in this disclosure witnesses thing?
Well, it happened a long time ago. I was in the United States Navy with a high-level top-secret clearance, and I worked at the busiest military communication facility on the planet back in 1969. It was a long time ago. I was in charge of the code room and taking in, thousands of messages. I was a certified high-speed code operator, and one day I had a most unusual message. A Navy ship off the coast of Alaska. The crew off of Port Bow, they witnessed coming out of the ocean a brightly glowing reddish-orange elliptical object about 70 feet in diameter. It merged out of the ocean, and it shot straight up into space. The ship's radar operator tracked the blitz, estimated about 7,000 miles per hour. This was 1969. At the time, I couldn't imagine anybody on this planet had any kind of technology like this other than being something of extraterrestrial origin. So this always left a question in my mind for many years. It wasn't until the year 2000 that I was asked to join a number of witnesses that were going to Washington, D.C. in front of the National Press Club to the media of the world to actually support hundreds of witnesses that had been gathered, that each one of us willing to testify under oath before a congressional hearing to bring this before the public.
What kind of witnesses was it? Was it normal people or just military people, or?
The hundreds of witnesses were included generals, admirals, astronauts. Some of the witnesses, my testimony was, rather mild compared to what the other witnesses were saying. Talking about Air Force nuclear launch officers having UFOs come in and shut down 10 nuclear-tipped ICBM missiles. Now, these people many of them brought official documentation along with them. There was also bases visually witnessed on the far side of the moon, this part of the moon we don't see. It's all they call the dark side of the moon, but it actually gets light and dark as it turns around. We don't see it. That people involved in retrieval. It's rare that these things happen, but once in a while they do crash. And 57 different extraterrestrial species had been categorized by 1989.
How many did you say? How many did you say?
57,
57 different. Okay, wow.
But this is 1989, and it was far more than that. NASA employees of 20 years, they're airbrushing the UFOs out before they release them to the public, the images. That the astronauts are told to keep quiet and secret what actually happened when we went to the moon in 1969. That we have these scientists within these black projects that can prove that we haven't needed nuclear oil or coal for like 70 years. You've got presidents, CIA directors being denied access to this subject matter. You've got... wow, there's so many different explosive testimonies. I think some of the most explosive testimonies is that we have these secret illegal operations going on that could alleviate many of the world's problems that was disclosed that day. We were only 20 witnesses were willing to go. It was the largest event in the history of the National Press Club on May 9th, 2001. The place was packed. There was 22 cameras in the back row. Each one, after we gave our testimony, stated that we'd be willing to testify under oath before a congressional hearing. Now, that's a penalty of perjury. Many of us is breaking top secret national security oaths in order to come forth with this. And we were backed by hundreds of witnesses that were willing to come forth if we had a congressional hearing. But the congressional hearing was denied by the Bush administration.
Okay, they didn't dare to listen to you then, or didn't want it to get out. But I still think that since you have all the media there, how did the media react to this?
Well, the media, you know, when I went to Washington, Kate, I was completely naive. I thought, my God, you know, how could any of this information be disclosed to the world and not just, you know, raise eyebrows and say, you know, what the heck's going on here, you know? But what the media did was what the intelligence agencies describe as a limited hangout. In other words, they took all this explosive testimony, and when CNN and the other media outlets they said, oh, is there life on other planets? Some people think they have proof there is. Dr. Greer has gathered hundreds of witnesses. They have documents proving the situation. What they want to do, they want to have a congressional hearing, have the Bush administration look into this, and that no congressional hearings are planned right now. And basically the person sitting back watching the evening news would get the impression that, oh, wow, they want to get hundreds of people together about the reality of UFOs, you know, which is not the critical alerting information that our government has actually been infiltrated by a rogue illegal operation. And that's how they covered it. CBS did a special interview with me. They flew a team down from Los Angeles, and I said, I saw what CNN did with it. And so I said, look, I'm not willing to do this interview unless I can make a quick statement. And that is that we have these scientists within these black projects that can prove, you know, put it on the table, you know, open congressional hearing, that we have the technology to get off of nuclear oil and coal, that non-polluting. They promised up and down, interviewed me for 45 minutes. When it came out, they basically did a cookie cutter exactly like CNN did. And the producer says, oh, she was almost in tears. She said, I know I promised, but the higher executives made me cut that part out. I didn't realize back in 2001 that the intelligence communities completely control what goes out through the mainstream media channels before it gets released.
No, I think it's terrible when it is like that, because I think that what more does it take when you have all the generals, you have all the people from the Army and the Air Force, and all of them are standing up there and doing this testimony, and I think that kind of news should actually be all over the world. And yeah, it should have been the big head news, actually, if it was presented right.
Well, what brought this whole event about in the first place? And we had a lot of supports from what you would call, you know, some people say, oh, the government is hiding things. Oh, the government's keeping it from. It's not, you know, the government. We have elements within the government, you could call them, for lack of a better term, white hats and black hats. We have people that want to move forward with a more benevolent disclosure, transparency, get the truth out. And we have other people that will be compliant with a hidden agenda. So what actually brought this about was Dr. Stephen Greer, who was the director for the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, was brought into a meeting back in 1993 by the CIA director, James Woolsey, when this all came about because Nelson Rockefeller wanted President Clinton to have a disclosure. And so he had a CIA director try to look into it. The CIA director was denied access. And so when Dr. Greer came into this meeting, he brought a huge stack of documents, you know, substantiating the reality. The CIA director's response was, I know the subject's real. I'm trying to figure out why the hell I can't gain access to it. He says, how can we possibly disclose what we don't have access to? And it's been, what, 18 years now, Kate. I've been, for the last 4 or 5 years, I've been studying, researching heavily. And what I've come to find out is, it sounds like a bizarre science fiction movie of what has happened behind the scenes. And that is that we actually had an infiltration that occurred back in at the end of World War II, and that President Eisenhower was basically forced into an agreement with a connection with Nazi Germany, who had developed anti-gravity and advanced craft back in 1934. So the United States did not develop anti-gravity until October of 1954. So they had like a 20-year advance. So they were able to intimidate. The flyover in July of 1952 over the Capitol building of a whole squadron of UFOs was actually German. And so what happened was, after this, this has happened in February of 1955, a new MJ-12 group was created. Truman, back in 1947, just shortly after the Roswell event, set up an original MJ-12 members. But after this, I guess you could say, this infiltration happened back in 1955. Bless you. What happened was a new MJ-12 group was created. All of the reverse engineering of these crashed extraterrestrial craft that happened, rarely happen, but they do happen, was at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. All of this was moved over to Area 51 and S4. New MJ-12 group was created. So basically, since that time, every president and CIA director and heads of intelligence have been denied access to this. After this whole relocation happened, which happened through Nelson Rockefeller, who restructured the MJ-12 CIA operations, what happened was Eisenhower tried to look into it, and he was denied access. And we have, deathbed witness testimonies and all this. And so he threatened to invade Area 51 with the First Army out of Colorado if he couldn't get 2 CIA agents to give him a report. So they allowed 2 agents to go in. They saw that there was in S4, which is below Area 51, is where they do the reverse engineering on where Bob Lazar worked, who is a famous movie out right now. They saw extraterrestrial beings, and they saw the reverse engineering stuff. And so we had a really troubled Eisenhower. Now, Kennedy was well aware of the situation. There's documents that show that Secretary of Air Force read him into this. He also had a background, Office of Naval Intelligence, was where all the way back to 1942, back when the Battle of Los Angeles was happening, where ET craft was flying, and there was the anti-aircraft guns shooting. 2 of these ET drone crafts were shot down. One was taken by the Navy to China Lake to reverse engineer. The other one was taken to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base to reverse engineer. And that's where they moved everything from Wright-Patterson over to Area 51. So after Eisenhower was denied access, Kennedy, 10 days before he was assassinated, attempted to, now he had to fire Allen Dulles, who was highly instrumental in this whole, I guess you could say, Nazi infiltration that was happening within the OSS and CIA. And so he attempted to get public access to these files, and he was assassinated 10 days later. It wasn't until 1977 that President Jimmy Carter, one of our witnesses, one of the 20 witnesses that joined me was attorney Daniel Sheehan, who was well aware that President Carter was denied access by the sitting CIA director, which was George H.W. Bush, Bush Sr. And so we have another president denied access. And then it was, as I mentioned, CIA Director James Woolsey was denied access. And then it wasn't until 1997 that Dr. Greer with astronaut Edgar Mitchell, Dr. Edgar Mitchell, who was the sixth man to walk on the moon, met at the Pentagon with the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the J2 position, Admiral Tom Wilson. He was able to provide him a NRO classified document that lists these unacknowledged special access programs, or USAPs. An unacknowledged special access program, basically, it doesn't matter who you are or what level of security. You can be the president, head of intelligence. You are denied that this project does not even exist. And so he looked into it. He found that these projects did exist. And he tried to look into it. He says, "Sir, you do not have a need to know." And he says, "The hell I don't. I'm the head of intelligence." And so he told Dr. Greer and Edgar Mitchell, quote, "If you can get your people together and go before the media, you have my permission. This group is illegal," quote unquote. In other words, it's not overseen by the Congress. It's not overseen by the president. It's a complete rogue operation that's been going secret all these years, all the time, going all the way back to 1955. So that is essentially what greenlighted us to go forward. And we had protection, from what I understand, from a lot of the White Hats. Dr. Greer had his life threatened not to go before the mainstream media. And so, after we all gave our testimony, we met with 24 senators and congresspeople up on Capitol Hill to see what their responses were. Basically, you can imagine if the president and the CIA directors are out of the loop, they're not read into this at all. No. I traveled across the country in the major cities across the United States, Colorado, Los Angeles, San Diego, San Francisco, Portland, all these major cities. We rented huge halls, and we had a executive briefing video that we gave to Congress that, people would give standing ovations and everything. But the media, every time the media came in and interviewed and everything, they would use what's called the giggle factor. In other words, in San Diego, they had dancing alien dolls with smoke. In San Francisco, we heard in the background.
Always trying to make fun of things.
It was told to make fun of it. And so they said, "Oh, the Disclosure Project's looking to aliens to solve the world's energy problems," And so without exception, the media affiliates would discount it. People would laugh and say, "UFOs, energy, let's get on with the big story. This week, the bozos meet the bonkos in the playoffs," and they laugh, and they go on like that. I have a couple of examples of that we'll have to play sometime. But the fact is, it's very serious, and that it's very real. And there's much substantiating documentation and proof for anybody that looks into it.
I think it's a big shame that people and the media are doing things like that. Because I, for myself as an experiencer, I know that coming out and telling what you have been experiencing is very difficult, because people, of course, they will making laugh of you and making fun of you, and they will, trying to make your story wrong in all kind of ways as possible. But when you have been seeing it, or you have been experiencing it, it's true. And even when the generals and people from the Navy and from the Air Force, even when they are testimony on the things like this, and still then people and the media are making fun of it. So it's not strange that there's still a lot of people all over the globe that are experiencing stuff like this, that they don't even dare or bother to go out in the mainstream or, to tell their story.
Oh, there's been a psychological intense campaign that's going all the way back to, going back to the 50s. As I start to research this stuff, outside of our normal education, with looking at, I try to base everything on what is a credible foundation, because you can't say anything absolutely for sure with any of this stuff because of the degree of compartmentalization. So anybody who says they've got it all figured out and they have all the answers, I run away from. But if you look at your solid base, like say you have, oh, now I hear there's like 900 witnesses, but I know there's at least 500. You have 500 witnesses, many of them with supporting documentation. Okay, that's a fairly solid base of a high probability that there's something going on. Not all these people are making this up. And if you take the authenticated documents and you plug it in order for me to try to understand this, I had to, it wasn't until the year 2014 that a media company out of Hollywood wanted me to, I used to be an ABC newsman. And so they wanted me to write an article on media control in regards to the UFO matter. So I didn't know where to begin. I was like, I was kind of shocked what happened with the media, 17 years ago, or 18 years now. And so what I find, in order to understand the subject, I basically laid out a chronology from the beginning of the 20th century, from the year 1900 to present day. And I started plugging in all these witness testimonies, all these events, all these documents. And what happens is it starts to form a very cohesive picture of what's been hidden from the world. I don't say I have all the answers by any means, but there are some things that I would say are much higher probability than other things, such as the secret space program that's going on. I was recently involved as one of the witness participants in a hit documentary called Above Majestic, which goes into the implications of the secret space program. After we gave our testimony in 2001, it inspired in 2002 a hacker in the UK. His name was Gary McKinnon. He wanted to find out the truth. He heard all these witnesses talking about, like Mark McCandish, his associate, saw 3 flying saucers that were hovering off the ground in Norton Air Force Base back in 1989 that were labeled alien reproduction vehicles. These were made back in the 1950s, and they can go faster than the speed of light. So, you have all these different things. Anyway, he dug into the U.S. Naval Space Command computers. The Bush administration wanted to put him in prison for 70 years. And he found out there was a program called Solar Warden. And he saw an image of a large cigar-shaped craft. He saw a list of these non-terrestrial officers and fleet-to-fleet transfers that the Navy was doing. There's no way he faked that. And then you have a witness that is in his mid-90s, William Tompkins, who has an incredible amount of supporting documentation and Navy admirals and captains supporting him. And what he's disclosing is that back when we were trying to catch up with the Nazis, the Navy, when I told you about how the Air Force took one and the Navy took the other, well, what happened was the Navy ended up doing their own program in secrecy because the Air Force basically forced them out of Project RAN, which they were both involved with. And the RAN corporation then evolved into the Air Force, which basically got connected with the whole thing that's happening with Eisenhower back in 1955, while the Navy was doing their own program in secret. Now, this gets really down the rabbit hole on this whole thing when you realize that Professor Hermann Oberth, who was the father of modern rocketry, who was Wernher von Braun's mentor, when he said publicly, when they said, how could Nazi Germany have made such incredible advances? And he responded, well, we had help from people from other worlds. And what happened was there was I believe the majority of extraterrestrial beings across, I believe there's a spectrum. I believe there's thousands of races out in our galaxy and beyond.
Yeah, I think that would be a very, narrow-minded if you are thinking that you are the only one in this universe. So yeah, and it's sad to hear that there are too many people that are like that. So I guess that those are the people that the others are trying to protect, so they're not getting a shock when the truth is getting out there.
We have some predatory elements, and we have some very benevolent elements that are kind of balancing the tables, you could say. And apparently the Navy is working with a Nordic, like you, a Nordic type, they look Nordic, in other words, race of beings that are highly advanced in technology. And Nazi Germany, back in the early 30s, when they moved all their operations out of Germany down to Argentina and Antarctica, which they found these huge caverns, because of the volcanic activity that's happening. It's actually, Antarctica has the largest amount of volcanic activity on the planet. And there's these huge, massive underground caverns that are heated like an igloo under 2 miles of ice. And so they started their secret space program there. And that's how they were able to achieve such a great advance, working with the reptilians, that William Tompkins was actually involved with 29 Navy spies that were embedded within Nazi Germany, that were receiving this information that we were attempting to try to figure out. And so yeah, it's it gets into, if you love science fiction, if you're a science fiction fan, this will ruin it for you, because the real truth about this whole thing and evidence behind it is far more fascinating.
Yeah, but for me that are not so much into all this information, all that stuff. But of course, I have heard a little bit here and a little bit there. But a lot of this, the thing that you've been talking about now in the last few minutes, I have heard a lot about that in the conspiracy theories. So how do I, as a normal person, how do I see the difference from the conspiracy stuff and to the stuff that you are having documents on?
Well, you mean as far as what's a person has to research this. I put my notes up online. After that media company wanted me to write an article on who controls. I titled it "Who Controls the Agreed Upon Reality Through the Mainstream Media and Why They Fear Disclosing the Truth About the Extraterrestrial Reality." That's the question. And so I put together some long notes on www.thewebmatrix.net, which is basically tells the incredible science fiction-like story of how all this came about and where we are currently today. And it seems that there is indications that Eisenhower set up a secret Marine intelligence unit, that he knew that when he entered into this agreement with Nazi Germany and their operations down in Antarctica, which are using slave operations still, he realized that they could sometime in the future completely take over our planet, completely enslave mankind. And so in order to protect our republic and our constitution, he set up a secret intelligence unit, which there are some indications that this is, that, it's my speculation that the 9/11 event kind of crossed a red line, and that there is active operations. There's many indications, such as executive orders that were made to arrest those and freeze the assets of those doing human rights abuse and corruption, which is, basically anybody within these dark elements that are operating behind the scenes. And that changes to the Uniform Code of Military Justice in order to try people in like a Nuremberg trials of after Nazi Germany for the people that have been doing this. Our planet, I spent 10 years after I went to the National Press Club and realized that they're not going to release this technology. They're going to control the media. And so Dr. Greer set up a corporation we had a database of about 300 scientists and inventors that had, the stuff that's in the black projects. You have to understand, if they're trillions of dollars and some of the best minds in the world with unlimited resources. They have technology that looks like science fiction to us. But there's a lot of very intelligent, brilliant minds on this planet that have solutions. So I volunteered because of my technical background. I worked with the Naval Electronic Engineering Center for many years and on alternative technologies. And so I had a good background to volunteer. I was one of 6 technical advisors. All of them had multiple PhDs in physics and science, except for myself. I don't have any PhDs or anything like that. But, I flew for 10 years meeting with scientists and inventors around the planet. One was down in the Dominican Republic. He had a little device, 500 watts of power out of 1 watt of power going in. We flew back down there. He totally disassembled. He said the day before we got there, or actually the day we got there, just a few hours ago, he said 2 agents said they were CIA, said, if this works, you're dead. And so he had disassembled it. Many scientists I've worked with have been suicided. They have been murdered. But most of them receive what's called a national security order, which is basically the national security apparatus infiltrated through through the patent office in a secret system called the Sensitive Application Warning System, which means that anybody who has a solar panel that's over 20% efficiency, anybody that's got like a free energy device, anybody that's got anti-gravity, anybody that's got any kind of technology that could get us off of nuclear, oil, and coal since the early 1950s, receives one of these national security orders, which says your invention has been deemed to be a detriment to the national security of the United States. Therefore, you cannot share it with anybody. And I've met with so many of these people. And so this is kind of my motivation. I don't talk on this subject and relate anything with money or anything like that. I feel it's my duty. This planet has been technologically hijacked, and an entire different world could be existing. We could have anti-gravity cars. We don't need to have this centralized power distribution system that has wires strung all over the place, because if we ever get a corona mass ejection or an EMP attack, millions of people are going to die because of our extreme dependence on everything operating on electricity.
That's true. It's just 1 day or 2 days without the power, then it's almost chaos.
Well, it's available. 0-point energy. It's a little device. Every home and business could have one at your home and your business. You disconnect the wires from the grid. Everybody could be decentralized, have their own unlimited power source that's non-polluting to the environment. They have even technologies that are classified that can remediate the radiation that's in the oceans from Fukushima. We could shut down these dangerous nuclear power plants that are all over. A lot of them are based on faults and things like that. I mean, it's a nightmare waiting to happen. With these things.
For me, I think it's crazy. If we all have all that kind of technology, then this shadow man or shadow groups, they are actually letting our world getting destroyed. But then I can also think that what's in it for them to destroy their own world, because that's what they're actually doing.
Well, one of the witnesses, Brigadier General Stephen Lufkin, was on Eisenhower's staff, and he was aware that he had lost control to the corporations that were tied into his Nazi Germany infiltration, you could say. And it would not be in the best of hands, I think he said, in a very understated way. And so the corporations that have interest in fossil fuels and nuclear power have interest in that. I pretty much know that, the reason they keep this planet technologically retarded is because they have this breakaway, you could call it, civilization that has technologies that, like I said earlier, look like science fiction. Anything you can, like Ben Rich said, the head of Lockheed Skunk Works in 1993, thing you can imagine, we already know how to do. We know how to take ET home. We've figured out the errors in the equation. In other words, they understand that the time-space matrix that we're in, we don't have to go at the speed of light to get from one galaxy to the other. All points in space are connected. They can warp the time-space continuum. That's how these craft appear out of nowhere, because they're coming from, they come into what's called a crossing point of light, where they come into this dimension. And that's how they travel the vast distances of space. Because, you know, the government officially says, oh, well, there's no way that other life forms can come here because there's too great a distance. You know, they can't come here. But we're surrounded by extraterrestrial life.
Yeah, I know.
Living in our planet. They have underground facilities. We have hundreds of these underground, deep underground military bases. Who I've talked to witnesses that work right alongside extraterrestrial beings that are in these classified projects. So it's a crisis of perception, because they have controlled our perceptions for so long.
I was just thinking that now it has been going 18 years since that conference. Did you think that that conference achieved anything, or do you think that we should that the military and the generals and other people shall try to testify again, to try again and again and again till they finally get government in the US or other governments to actually listen?
See, your question is why do they? I'm sorry. Could you rephrase that, Kate?
No, I was thinking that. Did you think that conference back in for 18 years ago? Do you think that they achieved something?
If there's
since I think I have a feeling that they didn't achieve the things that they were actually hoping for, since the media was bringing them down and the government didn't want to listen to them. The Bush, I don't remember if it was the Bush or what government that was on then, but they didn't listen.
I guess I could explain this in that the Nazis had like a fallback plan, because they knew they couldn't beat the United States because of the industrial might of the United States. They wanted to work qualitative rather than quantitative, and they had this plan called, probably mispronouncing it, Weltanschauungskrieg, which meant worldview warfare. They planned to infiltrate into the United States and take over education, which they did. Rockefeller in 1946, and rewrote the history books of what actually happened in the end of World War II to hide all of this. They basically, in 1950, Allen Dulles set up Operation Mockingbird, where they had 400 journalists. Today we have, in 1983, there was like 50 corporations that control everything we see and hear. Today there's only 5. They consolidated their control. And so you'll notice when the media channels, when they're given the talking points, they all sound the same, because they're all giving it from the highest level, from the intelligence community. So the main thing is they want to control our perceptions, and they've done the same with Hollywood. Starting in 1951, Project Dove. They started with the Day the Earth Stood Still was the first movie, and all the evil alien movies that we've seen, over the years. And so what they've done is controlling the mainstream media, controlling our education. So when you're born into it, I'm kind of up there in age, the new generations born into this, they don't know any other reality. They're born into your school education, your mainstream media, and everything forms your perception of the world. They hide these operations and the people that are controlling these, but there's slowly, some people say it's just empty hope, but I'm seeing executive orders happening. I'm seeing over 66,000 sealed indictments happening behind the scenes, that these, I guess you could call them cabal elements, that are all tied into maintaining the status quo of our planet being hijacked, have the people are taken. How you control something is you put your people at the top of the pyramid. If you put your commander in chief, or you put your people at the head of the FBI, the Department of Justice, or even the Food and Drug Administration, if you put your people in the top, everybody below that pyramid has to follow orders. And so lately we've been having a huge amount of purging happening in our government, and that we may see these people who have infiltrated, facing charges of treason.
That's about time.
It would be nice, wouldn't it? It would be quite a celebration for the whole earth. Imagine releasing these technologies. When Trump did his, I know a lot of people, and I don't like a lot of things that, some of the things that Trump has done, like supporting oil and the 5G networks and, other things, that when we have these technologies behind the scenes. But in his inauguration address, he talked about releasing the technologies of tomorrow. And his uncle was one of the MIT scientists that reviewed all of Tesla papers. And he was also, there's indications, according to documents, he was also brought into when the Roswell event happened. He was a head MIT scientist dealing with electrostatic physics. So it's possible, a high probability, that he shared a lot of this with, his little nephew. And so we may, there's indications, let's say, you can't say anything for sure, but there's indications that these technologies might get finally released.
With all these different viewpoints and division, where is the disclosure going, you think?
One more time, Kate, I'm sorry.
I was saying that with all these different viewpoints and division, where is the disclosure going?
Well, disclosure happened in 2001, but the public, my testimony, I've seen it in different languages all over across the alternative media of the internet. But, the mainstream media, only when they want something to come out, like the UFO event with the USS Nimitz, where they had back in November of 2017, all the mainstream media channels, you're talking CNN, BBC, the Washington Post, New York Times, the whole list of them that they control, saturated with, they got the green light. They wanted to put that in everybody's consciousness. But when we disclosed in 2001, what we were disclosing was so volatile, so explosive, and we had the proof to back it with the witnesses, that they didn't want to, they had to sanitize that. So that the public went, so it would look like, just, a group wanting to have UFO hearings, something like that. So, we're at a very exciting point in history right now, where this whole thing might just come out, and the public becomes aware of. It's going to be quite a psychological shift, because this stuff is. It took me a hard time to wrap my mind around this, Kate. When I went to Washington in 2001, I had a hard time wrapping my head around what all these witnesses were saying, and I got to know them. And then when I learned about the secret space program, I just had to take a step back. This is a little 20 and back programs, and, they take you through time, and they've got Nordic fleets out there, and the Navy's got a battle fleet out there that they've developed, and all this stuff. I just kind of, whoa, I'm being kind of healthy skeptical here, but as I start the research in with Dr. Michael Salla, who did a lot of Freedom of Information Act requests and dug into the documents, a lot of substantiating information, the rabbit hole keeps going deeper than you imagine.
Yeah, I can believe you. But still, I think it's strange anyway, because there are so many people all over the world. I think there was 1.3 million just Americans that are experiencing stuff. and imagine how many there are worldwide. So I think it's about time to make up a database, international database, with lots of questions in it, and all experiences, even if they're close encounters or just looking or whatever it is, and everyone can fill out a form and put into this huge database. And you can make a lot of inquiry, and I'm not sure if inquiry was the right word, but that you can do a lot of research out of that huge data bank. And I also think that the more people dare to do it, and the more proof you can actually go out to the public with, I think that is an expression who says that when there is more than 50% that says that they have seen it, then the other 49 or 48% start to change a little bit to those, because now they are in majority of those who that has been actually seen it.
Oh yeah, so, tens of thousands of reports. You can imagine, most people that see extraterrestrial craft, or half of them are, made in USA. Not everybody reports it. I had, with my brother, I had one fly, about 100 feet over my head. It was about 50 feet in diameter and glowing. So I've actually witnessed it, so I just, used to think people were making up these stories about, seeing these things, and they misread it or something like that. But when you have an actual experience, you have one fly over you, it changes your perspective.
Yeah, and I think that there's a lot of people that are not reporting it because they don't want to have anything to do with military, or don't know where to report it. And there's a lot of things there that make people not going to report it. For myself, I have been several close encounters, been viewing them several times, many times, and I have never reported it anywhere.
Right. Yeah, me neither.
So I because I haven't seen the point, because they are not being used to anything. So that's
and
why
you can imagine 90% of the people don't report this stuff. So it could be millions of people.
Yeah, and I think that even more people would report it if they know that the data would be used to do something useful. And after a little time, they could actually prove that most people that are actually seeing something, they are not crazy. For me, for example, when I was going back from Bulgaria, now it was in the 1st or 2nd December last year, we were taking the plane, and it was early morning, and I was sitting there looking out the window because you could see the sun over the clouds underneath the plane. And then I'm sitting there, of course, the rest of the plane is almost sleeping. And then I'm seeing this craft that looks like a silver bullet, a huge one, coming in the opposite direction. And at first I was thinking, okay, no wings, okay, no tails, and no stripe after it either. And there was no window, no doors, and it was smooth, completely like a silver bullet, and the sun was reflecting back from it. So I was just sitting there and looking at it, and I was comparing the speed from our plane, looking down on the clouds, and I was looking at that craft and then on the clouds to compare the speed. So the speed was a little bit higher, but it looks like it was like a daily routine. It was just flying. So I was following the look as far as I could before it disappeared.
So when you have an experience like that, it kind of opens you up to questioning why, when people like you and so many millions of others are seeing these craft, why is there continual denial by governments? It makes you question that. And then when you dig into it, then you find out why that there's rogue illegal operations going on in order to keep our planet at a certain technological level, while they advance themselves far beyond that. And it's because of these, and they don't have the best intentions, for humanity, these people. No. And so let's all put the awareness that all this is going to get transformed, and we can have an incredible world here.
Yeah, we could. And I was so fascinated with it, because it was so beautiful, and the shape, and and I was thinking, how does that fly? yeah, I had a lot of questions in my head afterwards when I was thinking about how that craft looked like. And one thing for sure, if I wasn't jumping around on the crutches, I would actually go up and go out to the pilot and ask him, and just tell him, I know what you saw, even if he was not allowed to say it, or yeah, and somewhere else. But I know that these pilots are seeing them often. So
Well,
I guess that if they could write down every time they are seeing something, it would be a big book.
They're saying it's such a beautiful planet. You know, the world could be much different than it is. That potentiality exists, but the thing that keeps that potentiality from being realized is the control of our perceptions. You know, being an ex-ABC newsman and noticing how the media is continually being controlled at the highest level to keep what they're afraid of is this global awakening that's happening. And you can see it everywhere. People are starting to piece it together. And there's this global awakening. And it's the last thing that this illegal rogue group wants to have happen is all the people become aware, because then there's this thing called a collective consciousness or a morphogenic field that all of us are connected to, just like animals and insects and birds and everything. We have, some people have an idea on one side of the planet, and before the internet, and they have similar idea on the other side of the planet, because we're all connected, our minds into a kind of a fractal holographic consciousness that's we all share. So anyway, I see it happening from people who you wouldn't even imagine would be aware of things happening all over the place. So there is this global awakening, I believe, happening.
Yeah, hopefully. Are there any last words you would like to share with us?
Just sharing my notes. I don't have any financial interest in this. Comparing notes. Don't believe everything you hear or see. Question everything. Do your own independent research. I'm just sharing the notes at thewebmatrix.net. I have no financial interest or whatsoever with this whole thing. I just want to have deceptions exposed and the truth revealed to the people of this world.
I think that was a very good question and good answer, because I think there's too many people that are swallowing everything they are hearing or reading too easily. And there are also those people that are having lots of opinion about things they have nothing and no clue about at all. So that's a good mix, and that will make new conspiracy theories or a lot of new crazy stuff. So yeah, be awake, do research, do a good job.
Yeah, critical thinking is important.
Definitive. Okay. Before we go off here, I will just remind people that are going in to look at our site that I have this GoFundMe project that I'm trying to help 85 Tibetan kids in Dharamsala to rebuild their homes. And they have roofs that are leaking very badly. They need to change windows, and a lot of stuff needs to be changed and fixed up in those places. So please help me share the link that I have on my webpage, and also fund some money. Yeah, help me out.
Thank you for the service you do, Kate, and getting this information out and all your shows you do.
Yeah, I think that we need to take a deeper look at things. I think that there are so many channels that are just doing the conspiracy stuff all the time. So I will try to be more with the scientific and down to earth thing. So that's why I'm calling the show From Paranormal to Normal, because there's a lot of stuff that actually is normal. You can explain most of it. So you can just try to say to most common people that moss in the forest or the trees communicates or sing. They will look at you and say that you are nuts, but they are actually been proven by a lot of scientists. So there is communication all over. So if people want to go in the forest or go passing a tree and be just blind and singing, okay, the tree is just a tree. A tree is much more than a tree. It's just a living organism. is a miracle, actually, when you start looking at it in a scientific level. So yeah, we don't need to go to another planet to find Avatar or finding an amazing planet. We can just start to really look deep into our own planet and the animals, the nature, everything.
Oh, this is amazing. This is an amazing planet. You know, we're amazing beings, you know, that are on this, and we just have to tap into our full potential
Yeah,
and not be deceived in the world, and you know, deeply question everything and get to the facts behind it. It sounds like a science fiction movie, I know, but that's because of the you know, perception matrix that we have been indoctrinated and born into.
yeah. Okay, folks, that was all for tonight. And thank you for listening. And hopefully, we'll see you next Friday. Because on next Friday, I will have a very good friend of mine, Linda. And she was getting cancer for many, many years ago. And the doctor told her that she had 6 months left to live. And would you dare to trust the law of attraction if you are terminally ill? Okay, join in next Friday and listen to her story because she's still alive so many years after, and there's no chemo in there. Goodbye.
Thank you, Kate. Good night. Well, that was a lot to cover for 1 hour, huh?